They say the past is a foreign country, but in the town of New Salem, Illinois, the past was a neighbor who never moved out. You could feel it in the way the wind rattled the old shutters on Main Street, in the way the river mist curled around the gravestones at night, and in the way the townsfolk never quite looked you in the eye after sundown. Abraham Lincoln had always been a tall man, but in the autumn of 1830 he felt smaller than ever. He was 26, already marked by tragedy and haunted by the memory of Anne Rutledge's grave. He had come to New Salem to escape the ghosts of his own making, but some ghosts, he would soon learn, were not content to stay buried. It began with a letter, as these things so often do. The letter was addressed in a spidery hand, the ink brown as dried blood. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a bill for lamp oil and a pamphlet about the perils of intemperance. Lincoln almost threw it away, but something about the way his name was written, Abraham Lincoln Esquerra, made him pause. He opened it with a pocket knife. The paper was thin and brittle, and the words seemed to crawl across the page. Mr. Lincoln, there are shadows in New Salem that do not belong to this world. I have seen them. I have heard them whisper your name. Come to the old mill at midnight if you value the safety of your soul. A friend. Lincoln read the letter 3 times. Each time the words seemed to shift, like footprints in fresh snow. He thought about ignoring it. He thought about burning it. Instead, he folded it carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. That night, he dreamed of shadows moving behind the walls of his cabin, of long fingers reaching through the cracks, and of a voice, soft, almost gentle, calling his name from the darkness. The old mill stood at the edge of town, where the woods pressed close and the river ran black and silent by day. It was a place for children to dare each other and for lovers to carve their initials into the beams. By night, it was a place best avoided. Lincoln arrived at midnight, as the letter had instructed. The moon was a thin silver coin in the sky, and the air tasted of rain and old secrets. He carried a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other, though he doubted either would do him much good. Inside, the mill was colder than the night outside. Shadows clung to the walls, thick as cobwebs. Lincoln's lantern cast a trembling circle of light, but it seemed to do little against the darkness. He waited. At first, there was only the sound of water turning the wheel and the distant cry of an owl. Then, slowly, another sound emerged, a whisper. Just at the edge of hearing, it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Lincoln. He spun, pistol raised, but saw nothing. The whisper came again, closer now. Lincoln. A shape moved in the corner of his eye, a figure impossibly tall and thin, with a face lost in shadow. Lincoln's heart hammered in his chest. "Who's there?" he demanded. The figure stepped forward, and Lincoln saw that it wore a suit much like his own, but older, stained with something dark. Its eyes were pits of midnight, and its mouth was a thin, bloodless line. "You know me," the figure said, its voice a dry rustle. "You have always known me." Lincoln tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. The figure smiled, a terrible, broken smile. "I am the shadow you cast, Abraham. I am the debt you owe." Lincoln stumbled back, the pistol shaking in his hand. "What do you want?" he managed. The figure's smile widened. "I want what was promised. I want what you took." Lincoln's mind raced. He thought of Anne Rutledge, of the promises he had made and broken, of the secrets he had buried in the dark soil of New Salem. "I have nothing left to give," he whispered. The figure laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a grave. "Everyone has something left to give, Abraham. Even you." The lantern flickered, and for a moment, Lincoln saw the faces of the dead, Anne, his mother, the men he had failed, crowding the darkness behind the figure. Their eyes were empty, their mouths open in silent screams. The figure stepped closer. "Midnight is coming, Abraham, and when it does, you will pay your debt." Lincoln's mind was a tangle of doubt and dread as he left the mill. The memory of the tall man's hollow voice echoing in his skull. The night pressed in, thick and suffocating, as if the very air of New Salem had grown heavier. He hurried down the path, lantern flickering, pistol cold in his hand. But the shadows seemed to multiply with every step. He paused at the edge of the woods, heart pounding, and glanced back. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw a silhouette, impossibly tall, standing in the doorway of the mill, watching. But when he blinked, there was only darkness and the soft, ceaseless murmur of the river. Back at his cabin, Lincoln bolted the door and built up the fire. But the warmth did nothing for the chill inside him. He tried to read, but the words swam on the page. He tried to write, but his pen scratched nonsense. The letter from a friend sat on the table, its spidery script seeming to shift in the firelight. The clock ticked past midnight. Lincoln's eyes grew heavy. He drifted into fitful sleep and dreamed of a field of graves, each marked with a name he knew: Anne Rutledge, his mother, the McAllisters, and the end, a stone with his own name carved deep. The tall man stood among them, his face a void, his hand outstretched. Lincoln woke with a start, cold sweat slick on his brow. The fire had burned low, and for a moment he thought he saw something move in the shadows by the hearth. A flicker, a suggestion of impossible height. He closed his eyes, counted to 10, and when he looked again, he was alone. The next day, Lincoln wandered the town, searching for answers. The townsfolk eyed him with a wary distance, as if they sensed something clinging to him. At the general store, Mrs. Carter pressed a Bible into his hands with trembling fingers. At the tavern, the talk was of bad omens and lost livestock. At the edge of town, Lincoln met Thomas, the old trapper, who was sharpening a knife with hands that never seemed to stop trembling. "You seen him, haven't you, Abe?" Thomas asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Lincoln hesitated. "Seen who?" Thomas spat into the dust. "The tall man. He's been here before. Comes when the moon's thin and the river runs black. Takes what's owed." Lincoln felt a chill. "What does he want?" Thomas's eyes darted to the trees. "He wants what everyone wants, what was promised. Sometimes it's a secret, sometimes it's a soul." The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead. Lincoln glanced at the woods. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure among the trees, impossibly tall, but when he looked again, it was gone. That evening, the sky turned the color of old bruises. Lincoln sat by the fire, the letter from a friend open on his lap. He traced the words with a trembling finger, searching for meaning in the shifting script. At 11, there was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. Lincoln opened it to find a woman, soaked and shivering, her eyes wide with terror. "He's coming," she whispered. "He took my husband. He'll take me next." Lincoln ushered her inside, bolting the door behind them. She huddled by the fire, clutching a blanket, her gaze fixed on the window. "What's your name?" Lincoln asked. "Mary," she said. "Mary Wilkins." He recognized her. Her husband had vanished 2 weeks before, gone without a trace. "He calls your name," Mary whispered. "If you answer, you're lost." The clock struck midnight. The wind died and a shadow fell across the window. The fire guttered, plunging the room into darkness. Lincoln drew Mary close, heart hammering. A voice, soft and sibilant, slipped through the cracks in the door. "Abraham." Mary's grip tightened on his arm. "Don't answer," she hissed. The voice came again, closer now, as if inside the room. Abraham Lincoln. The shadows writhed, stretching long fingers across the floor. The temperature plummeted. Frost bloomed on the window pane. The door creaked open, though Lincoln was sure he'd locked it. The tall man stepped inside, ducking beneath the lintel. His face was a void, his eyes burning coals. "Your debt is due, Abraham." Lincoln raised his pistol, but the tall man only smiled, a terrible, broken smile. "You cannot fight what you owe," the tall man said. "You can only pay." Mary screamed as the tall man reached for her. Lincoln fired, but the bullet passed through the figure like smoke. The tall man seized Mary by the wrist. She shrieked, her body convulsing. Lincoln lunged, grabbing her other arm, but the tall man's grip was iron. "One must pay," the tall man intoned. Lincoln felt a cold hand close around his heart. He gasped, vision swimming, and then, as suddenly as he had come, the tall man was gone. Mary lay on the floor, sobbing, her wrist bruised and blackened. Dawn crept gray and uncertain into the cabin. Mary was gone, vanished like a dream. Lincoln searched the woods, calling her name, but there was no trace, only the hush of the trees and the distant rush of the river. He returned to the old mill, desperate for answers. The shadows inside seemed thicker than ever, pressing close. "Why me?" Lincoln shouted into the darkness. "What have I done?" The tall man's voice echoed from the rafters, soft as the wind in the grass. "You made a promise, Abraham, a promise you did not keep." Memories flooded back, promises to Anne, to his mother, to the people of New Salem, promises broken by pride, by fear, by the simple fact of being human. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The tall man stepped from the shadows, his form shifting, becoming less monstrous, more familiar. "Will you pay your debt?" he asked. Lincoln nodded, tears streaming down his face. The tall man reached out, and Lincoln took his hand. The world spun. Lincoln found himself standing in a place he'd never seen, a field of tall grass beneath a sky the color of lead. The tall man stood beside him, silent. All around, the grass whispered secrets, names, regrets, broken promises. Lincoln heard his own voice among them, pleading, confessing. "What is this place?" he asked. The tall man's smile was gentle, almost sad. "This is the place between, the place of debts and reckonings." Lincoln saw shadows moving in the grass, faces he recognized, hands reaching for him. "Why me?" he asked again. The tall man's eyes burned brighter. "Because you remember, because you regret, because you are willing to pay." Lincoln fell to his knees, overwhelmed by sorrow and guilt. "What must I do?" he whispered. The tall man knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You must remember. You must atone. You must let go." Lincoln closed his eyes, and the grass whispered around him. They found Lincoln at dawn, sitting by the old mill, eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. The townsfolk said he looked peaceful, as if he had finally made his peace with the world. But some, those who had seen the shadows moving in the woods, whispered that he had bargained with something old and hungry, and that New Salem would never be the same. And on certain nights, when the moon is thin and the wind howls through the trees, some say you can see a tall figure standing at the edge of town, watching, waiting, patient as the grave. And if you listen closely, you might hear the grass whisper your name.